Hello everybody, welcome to Nana's Journey. I'm Deanna, and today I thought we would have a little chat and a question session. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Southern California. I have 4 sisters and 2 brothers. I am right in the middle. I married a wonderful man in 1982 in May. So this coming May, we will have been married for 41 years, and we are still very happy together. We have 5 wonderful children, 4 girls and a boy. One of my daughters is one that quilts with me, and she is actually the reason I do these videos. When she moved away from home, this was a way to stay connected and to continue to kind of enjoy our hobby together. When I was younger, in junior high, I took home ec like everyone else did because it was required. Well, the girls had to. So I learned to sew. My mom also helped me sew. She sewed a lot of our clothes. When my kids were younger, I sewed a lot of their clothes because I couldn't afford to buy the clothes. And then times changed, and it got to the point where it was cheaper to buy the clothes than to make them. So I haven't sewn clothes in decades. I had always looked forward to being a homemaker and a mother. My problem was I never looked past the kids moving out of the house. So I didn't have a hobby in mind to help keep me busy. I didn't really need to sew any clothes. And one time somebody mentioned, free motion quilting. So I got out the little darning foot and I put the feed dogs down, and I was going to make a heart or something, some simple design, in quilt. And there was long stitches and short stitches and tiny stitches and medium stitches. And I gave it like a 2-minute try, and I said, nope, that's not for me. So I have spent years, at least 10 years, trying to figure out a hobby that I would get into for more than a few weeks or a month and then, drop it. I was having a hard time finding something that I knew I wouldn't walk away from. And because I suffer from depression, the lack of motivation is actually pretty high. So I literally spent over 10 years trying to figure out a hobby that I knew I would stick with. And one day I was sitting in the chair and I wasn't even thinking about quilting, and all of a sudden this light bulb goes off and I'm going, I want to quilt. I think I'm gonna quilt. And I swear God just took pity on me and was tired of waiting for me to decide what to do, and said, okay, you're gonna love quilting, you do this. So me and my daughter, Christy Ann, we went to the fabric store, which is in the next town over. The only thing we have is Walmart, and I do not consider Walmart a fabric store. I especially wouldn't buy quilt fabric from there. But we took a beginner's class. When we went over there, they were having a sale on sewing machines, so I called up my husband. I was going to joke around with him, hey, they got sewing machines on sale and this one does embroidery. So he's going, okay. And I go, what? So I got me a new sewing machine. I have a Bernina 780 right here, and I really like it. My old machine was a Bernina 1130, and I loved that one. So I still love it. It still works really good. So me and my daughter took a quilting class, and we both just really enjoyed it. So from there, I started making quilts. I made one for me, and then I decided, well, I will make one, because this was at the end of 2013. So for 2014, all my family was getting a quilt for their birthday, so I didn't have to think of what to get for their birthday. I already knew what they were getting. I just had to decide on a pattern and what fabric to get, which for me is the hardest part of making a quilt. I can find a pattern easy enough, putting the fabric together and finding a collection is hard. And even harder is which fabrics and which colors do I put where in the quilt. So luckily, there are fabric collections. So when a designer makes some fabric, they have an entire collection of fabrics that go together. And so I said, that's what I need. I need a collection that goes together because I can't pick out fabrics very well. So I did that, and I got some layer cakes and some jelly rolls, and those are called pre-cuts. And I'll go into those later, along with the yardage. And I made some quilts. And the first ones aren't all that good, but they're usable and they're okay. There's nothing, too terribly wrong with them. But, if you've seen my past videos, you know that I'm still making mistakes. A lot of mistakes. Cutting mistakes, sewing mistakes, quilting mistakes, buying mistakes, buying the wrong yardage. Every time I've made a quilt, I've tried to include something that I hadn't done yet. And I don't do that so much now. Now I'm trying to improve what I know, because I've learned quite a bit. There are a few things that I still don't really want to do. I don't want to do all the curves. I have done them, and they turn out as just not something I enjoy. I do enjoy piecing. I enjoy seeing everything come together, going, wow, this is going to look so cool. I enjoy the quilting. I do not enjoy sandwiching the quilts. That is my most hated thing. And I don't really enjoy the binding. But everything else I enjoy. And coming up with the quilts and designing, which is kind of like dreaming. It's like, ooh, let's make this, let's do that. So that's fun too. And that is actually the longest process for me, is just coming up with a quilt that am actually going to make, and then finding the fabrics for it and where those, each fabric is going to go, has actually taken me several months on a few quilts, especially when I'm making it for someone else and they're adding their input. Then it takes a really long time, because sometimes you might find a fabric you really like, and you know where you're going to put it and everything, and then you start looking online for the fabric, and they've only got a few of the pieces left. Well, then you've got to start all over again and find different fabric that is going to either go with the ones that they don't have, or the ones that they still have, or you have to come up with all new fabric collection. And so for me, that's hard, because I'm not an artist. I don't know how to put fabrics together very well. I kind of have to be told. So that is about me. Also, one of my sisters, Patty, she's the one just younger than me. She doesn't know anything about quilting, and she's always asking me these questions. So that's what I'm going to answer today. So if you are a quilter, you really don't need to listen to the rest of this video. But if you don't know anything about quilting, then I've got a few answers for you. Her first question was, before I start that, I've got to tell you, I had written last year my quilting journal. I said, I've got to keep track of all these quilts that I've made. So I tried to remember the past 9 years worth of quilts and to get a picture of each one. I wrote my journal, and I had a picture of the quilt, and I wrote a little bit about it and put it in the orders the best that I could, because I couldn't remember when one was made particularly. So I think it was, this year. But so if you are quilting, make sure you keep a journal and a picture of each quilt, because you get those quilts away and you don't see them anymore. But my brother was reading my journal, and he was a little confused when I used the term quilting, because I never realized before that I use it interchangeably with I'm making a quilt. What are you doing? Oh, I'm quilting. I'm not actually doing the top stitching of a quilt. That's when you talk about the quilting, you're talking about the all over stitching that's on the quilt that keeps the quilt sandwich together. But I was using that interchangeably between, oh, I'm quilting and I'm quilting. So if anybody else knows how to differentiate those, let me know. Because I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that uses that I'm quilting as both terms. Okay, here's 1 yard of fabric. It'll be about 42 inches, all, unfolded. This way. And 36 inches this way, 42. So if you want 1/4 of a yard, they're going to measure out 9 inches and cut. So you've got a strip, about like this, 9 by 42. But a fat quarter is where they're going to cut the yard in half. Okay. Then they're going to cut this way. So it's still 1/4 of a yard, but you have a different shape. And you can do, you can do a 10-inch square on that. It should be about 18 by 20-ish, depending on how well they cut. So you can do a lot more shapes and piecing with this size of fabric than you can with just the 9-inch strip. Sometimes the 9-inch strip is okay, it just depends on what you're doing. And the same with a fat 1/8, except they would give you, this would be a 1/4 yard strip, but I'm sorry, wait, that's in half, half again. A 1/4 yard strip is, an 1/8 is this. That is what, if you asked for an 1/8 of a yard, you would get a strip like this, 4.5 inches. And instead they take the 1/4 yard and give you a fat 1/8. Now you can get fat quarters in bundles. This one happens to be by Ali K Design from Moda. Just says create, so it's the create design. It's some blacks, whites, and grays. It's really pretty. So all of these will go together. So that's how I like to do my fabrics. I get a collection. That way I know they'll come together, because I'm not good at that. This is a jelly roll. This is an old jelly roll. You probably can't get this anymore. It's Artisan Boutiques by Robert Kaufman, Sunny Day. Jelly rolls can also, I got this at a craft fair, can come like this. They're not always called a jelly roll. This is called island strips. Depends on what company you buy them from. But all they are is a collection of 2.5-inch strips. And you usually get, this one's got 20, this one's got 40. So they don't always have the same amount of strips in their packaging, so make sure you take a note of how much is in there. Same with fat quarters. Some will have more than others. This is a charm pack. It is a 5-inch square, and they usually come with the pinked edges so that it doesn't fray. And they just take some fabrics from a collection and cut them in 5-inch squares, and you could easily just take one of these, sew them all together, and you'd have a really cute quilt. So there's that a layer cake is another pre-cut, and it's the same as this, but it's 10-inch squares. It's a 10-inch square. I don't happen to have one of those to show you. Okay, the next question was, what is the length of grain? Well, fabric will have this salvage. It gives you the information of the name of the collection, who did it. This is Bee Basics and Backgrounds by Lori Holt of Bee in My Bonnet, 2020 by Riley Blake Designs, and it's always done in the colors of this. Sometimes they'll have dots, but this is only 2 colors, so they used the white and then the brown. So the same direction that the salvage is going is the direction of the length of grain. This way is the cross grain. And when I get fabrics, I cut on the cross grain. We make our strips. We go this way. We cut our piece. If you're doing squares and stuff, it really doesn't matter which way it's going. This is just always the direction I have my fabric laid out. The bias goes diagonal. Now, my sister asked, do you have to cut on the bias to make your strips? You know, and I said, no. You don't have to do that. Bias is good for if you're going to be doing like a binding for rounded corners. See how that will make a nice band, and then it will bend this way. I'm not doing it very well, but it will make bends, you know, slight bends without it crinkling up. You know, if you try to bend this one, it's not going to bend smoothly. It's going to have those crinkles and puckers in it because the bias will stretch a little. This doesn't stretch, this doesn't stretch, but the bias, see how that flower distorts? That will stretch. And so when working with the bias, you have to be careful because you can stretch it out of shape, so just handle it carefully. But I only use the bias for like stems if I'm doing applique. That's only the time that I personally use a bias cut. But all my other cuts are cross grain. And she goes, well, when you join your strips together, she goes, do they have to be joined like this? Or can you just, you know, put the 2 ends together and join them? The answer is you can do both. If I am really tight on how much fabric I have left and I'm not sure I'm going to make it, I will put the ends together, sew, iron them open, and continue on. The reason they do it this way is because when you fold it over, because you're going to fold your bias, because you're going to sew this to the edge of the fabric, and then you're going to wrap that around to the other side so that you want the right sided fabric on both sides. See how these are in different spots. So when I fold it over, they're not laying on top of each other, and that creates less bulk for when you are sewing. And that's really the only reason they do it that way. So that is why I do it. I personally do it this way unless I'm running low on fabric. Then I will just put the ends together and sew and do it that way. So it'll still work. There's one thing I learned is there really are no rules when it comes to quilting. If you want to do something a certain way, do it. There's no one stopping you. There's no such thing really as the quilt police. No one's going to say you're doing it wrong, and if they are, then they're not quilters, because quilters know that doing it your way is actually the right way. So there are so many ways to do things in quilting, and so many different types of quilting. Just do what you like doing, what you feel comfortable with. The question was, what is nesting? But first I'm going to show you chain stitching, because that actually comes first. That was another question my sister had. So instead of breaking my thread there and then starting to sew the next piece, I just continue, I grab the next piece, and I just continue on and sew it. And then they are all chained together. Now for nesting, and quilters normally press to the dark side unless the pattern tells them otherwise, so that the seam in the back shows, that you press back there, shows through less. Because if you have light fabric and do a dark fabric, then that can show through. Okay, when you nest something together, we're going to have the dark sides opposite. Make a little 4 patch. This seam is going down, and this seam is going up. And because of that bump of that fabric, they are going to nest or kind of lock into place. So I'm going to pin those together. So and you end up with a really nice point. So that is nesting and chain stitching. Okay, another question was, what do you mean by don't cross the intersection? So when I'm making flying geese, or you do folded corners or whatever, I'm going to use this strip. I'm going to put these corners along this red line here to keep me straight. Okay, so now let's get these threads out of the way. Oh, I have the white on the bobbin where there is a seam line here. The seam line going here and the seam line going here. When you're sewing a piece to here, let's say I wanted to sew this 4 patch to this flying geese that doesn't fit. When I sew along here, I want to go across this line where the seams intersect. I want to sew along there, so that when I turn it over, let's do it this way. You want your points to look like this. So if you sew across that point, then when you flip it over, the intersection, not the point, you will have nice points. Okay, another question was, what is a quilt sandwich? All a quilt sandwich is, you've got your backing material, it's on the back of your quilt. You've got a layer of batting, and then you've got your quilt top. And that is your quilt sandwich. You've got the 2 pieces of bread, and the batting is the meat or the inside. So that is a quilt sandwich. And then you quilt your sandwich. You put the design on the quilt sandwich, and then your binding goes around the edges. And that is the very last thing that's done, and then you're finished. Okay, another question was, where do I get my patterns? Well, you can get them from magazines, from books. They will have the yardage, the instructions on how to do it, the templates. Magazines will have free patterns in them. You can look online for free patterns. I made this one time, but in, bright batiks. But all the patterns, they're like sewing patterns. This is the camping one that I just did recently. It's from Lori Holt. It'll have all the yardage requirements and then the step-by-step instructions, just like you do if you're sewing. It's just like that. This was a applique one that I did. I saw that online. Thought it was really cute, and I thought I'd give it a try, and it did. It turned out really cute. I saw she did a sample block on YouTube that I caught. It's My Cozy Village by Felicia Breno. I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyways, that was fun to make. There's also, you can design your own patterns. You can look at books or Pinterest and just look at the quilt blocks. And you can see, how they're constructed, once you get a little farther in. See, these ones, those are just strips of fabric put in different, directions, different widths, different number of fabrics. And then if you're really getting into it, you can get something like EQ8. That's software for your computers. It will not work for an iPad or a tablet. And it has a bunch of blocks and fabrics and other stuff already loaded in there. Or you can make your own blocks and design your own quilt, and you can import fabric collections so that you can see how the quilt is actually going to look. And that is how I did the Ohio Star and 4-patch ones on that video. Okay, another question was, where do you get your supplies? Well, I get them from online. I go to Missouri Star Quilt Company, I go to Fat Quarter Shop, I go to my quilt store that's in the next town over, but they're kind of expensive. That's something a lot of quilters don't tell you, is that quilting is a very expensive hobby. I can easily spend $200 to $300 on a quilt. You can do it cheaper. You can go to garage sales and get sheets and shirts and other clothing and cut them up, and you can make a really cheap quilt that way. So it can be done. I also get my tools from Amazon, or I get my Debbie Tucker rulers from Studio180.net. No, she does not sponsor me. I just like her tools, and so I do use those. And no, you don't have to use her rulers to do a certain block. But I like her method. Her method is the same way my brain works and my personality, so those work well for me. You find what works for you. Okay, if you have any questions, put them down in the comments below, and I will get to them. If I have enough, I will make another video. Also, I don't know if I will have a video coming out after this for a little while, because I've got company and I'm in the middle of making a quilt that's taking longer than I thought. Plus it took more fabric than I thought, so now I'm waiting for the order to come in. So it might be a little while before the next video comes out. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.